Hi guys, and welcome to another digital painting tutorial. Today we'll be going over how to make this holiday wreath on a door using oil and turpentine brushes in Procreate. Hopefully by the end of this tutorial you'll have something that looks like this. As always, let's start by going over the dimensions by heading into our Tools Action button, Canvas, Canvas Information. Here is where you are able to title your work and sign your name. Next, if you go under Dimensions, we'll be working in 2160 pixels by 3840 pixels at 300 dpi. This size canvas is great for making wallpapers for your phone, as well as social media posts for various platforms. Heading over to our color profile, we'll be using the default, which is the second option from the top of our available color profiles. Now is a good time to head on over to Patreon, which I have linked below, if you would like to get the color palette, which you will see down here below. I do amend it throughout the piece, and you will have the amended version available to you on Patreon. You'll also be able to get this sketch there as well. With that being said, let's jump in. And as a side note, while I do consider this a tutorial, I would also consider it a paint along with me, which means I'll probably be speaking a little less than usual, but I'll certainly be speaking up when necessary. The main brushes that we'll be using are the turpentine and oil paint brush in Procreate, and for the eraser I'll be using the ink brush. I'm going to select the layer that has the sketch and rename that layer Sketch, just so it's a little bit easier for us to keep track of what we're doing with our layers. Selecting the plus sign, we'll now have our second layer, which we are going to put underneath our sketch. We are also going to make sure we have the oil paint brush selected, and we're going to be using the darkest red available on that palette. Returning to our layers, we are going to duplicate the sketch, hide the sketch underneath, and selecting the layer on top, we're going to select invert, and now we can see our sketch a lot better because it's showing up as white instead of black. Returning to layer 2, we're going to now start brushing in this lighter, more vibrant red onto our front door. You'll notice that I am changing the direction of my brush stroke, and that's because I want to show that the grain of wood does in fact change. There really is no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get the colors to look aesthetic. So I'm going back and forth between the turpentine and oil brush, as well as the two different reds. Heading back into layers, we are going to add a new layer on top of layer 2, the back of the door, and we'll be selecting the darkest green available on our color palette. I am using the turpentine brush under the painting brushes in the brush library, and I'm using them to create the foundation of the wreath so that we have a nice dark color to start with, and then build in lighter colors so that this shows up as shadow underneath. Okay, and now I'm going to take off the sketch so I can see how it's showing up without the aid of those guided lines. And I'm going to go in and just correct the shape just a little bit. Real quick, before we head into colors, just want to remind you, don't forget to subscribe. Jumping back in, let's select the green all the way at the top right corner. There we go. And now I'm still using the turpentine brush, and I'm just starting to put in the first layer of branches. I'm trying to make sure I leave some of the darkest green showing underneath because I want it to show the depth and the shadow of the wreath so that it doesn't look flat and one-dimensional. I try and change up the direction of those little branches here and there. I think it helps it look a little bit more organic. You can, of course, choose a totally different style for how you do your branches. If you want them to all go in the same direction, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All right, now we're going to head back into our colors and we're going to select the green in the middle all the way on the far right side, and this will be our next color. We will be using this color less than the previous green, but we still will be using quite a bit of it to help parts of the wreath stand out. Okay, and I feel pretty good, so now we're going to use that green all the way at the far right side, but on the bottom now. And now we are going to slowly introduce this color, keeping it, sparsely showing up, but still adding. I think it really does add dimension, but we just don't want the colors to feel like they're all competing for your attention. And it really does take away from lighting later on if we have too many colors competing for the eye's attention. All right, now we're going to go back in. We're choosing that lightest green second from the far right on the bottom. You guys saw what I did there. Notice here how I'm not using it too much. I'm spacing it out, really using it more to just highlight a couple of branches here and there. Alright, and now we're going to head back into our layers, and we're going to select layer 2 and add a layer above that. So it's beneath the wreath, but on top of the door. We're going to select the dark red, and we're going to use this to help create just a little bit of shadow underneath the wreath, as well as towards the more diagonal bottom corner of the door as well. Essentially, think of the porch light for this door at the top left corner, and that's what I'm thinking of in terms of my lighting. Alright, so now we'll head back into our layers, add a new layer above the door. We're going to select the coral color all the way on the bottom left, and we're going to put our sketch back on so that I can see where I wanted the lines on the door to be. Okay, and now we can take off the sketch so you can kind of see how it's looking. Now I'm going in with my smudge tool, and I'm just going to take out some of the harshness of the lines, just try to get it to look a little bit more loose. So again, see how it's a little bit darker down in that corner and lighter up here? That's because that is where my light source is coming from. And hopefully by the end we'll have everything reflecting that. And here I'm going to combine layer 5 with layer 2. So everything's on one layer for the door. I am adding a little bit of that brighter red just so I can have just a bit more color variation on the inside of the wreath where the shadow hits. Now I'm going to add a layer above the wreath, and that will be our new layer 5. And I'm finding the correct yellow that I'm looking for, hoping for sort of like a gold. And once I have it, I do end up getting rid of some of the blues that I thought I was going to use, but changed my mind and thought yellow would look better. So that will be on the amended color palette if you downloaded it from Patreon. And here I am selecting 4 different golds or yellows, oranges, you know what I mean, browns, and those I will be using in order to create the ornaments. Going to my sketch, I take the opacity down just so it's a little bit easier for me to see where I'm painting. And I take the darkest of the gold, orange, yellow, browns, and I put down my dark color first. Now we're going to add another layer on top of layer 5, so now we're on layer 6. And I am going to make this bow. I decided it was time to make the bow. I'm just getting my foundational color down and the shape so that way I have a visual of where it's going to be. Yes, I have the sketch, but it's different when you add color, or at least that's what I tell myself. Now that I have my dark color down, I'm going in with the lighter red, trying to get just a little more shape out of it, a little more notice. Now I take off the sketch to reveal how it looks. Okay, for now I'm going to hide that and go back to my layer 5, which are the ornaments. I'm going to select the warm, the third darkest. It's the very warm yellow one. Very bumblebee yellow. Alright, right now it looks like we might have some like lemons or oranges. Don't worry, we're not done. Now we're going to that tan color, that creamy, beigey color, and we're going to add that as yet another color that's reflecting off of the rounded shape of our ornaments. And then here we're going to grab or select the lightest of the colors. We're going to keep in mind where that light source is, so our porch light off to the top left. And we're going to have that be our brightest color. And I already feel like they're starting to come to life with all those different yellows, golds, browns, orangey colors. It doesn't really look orange when you put it against the green and the red, so we'll just stick with golden yellow and brown. It's at this point that I decide it's time that I duplicate the layers that I feel are rather permanent and move them into their own little group. So I duplicated the lights now, the wreath, and now the door, so that I can put those into a group to preserve them in case I end up making any changes past this point that I feel I'd like to go back to the basics here. I also do that with the bow. I duplicate it and then put it into my original group there for safekeeping. So now we are going to combine the ornaments with the wreath. This next step is a personal choice. You don't have to do these steps, but I like to combine them with the wreath so that way the colors start to mesh together and it starts to feel a little bit like it was all painted at the same time and the colors just sort of bled together a tiny bit. So you'll see right here I do some smudging and I smudge around the edges so it starts picking up some of the colors around the ornament, and I just feel like it rests or sits a little bit more into the wreath, but that's a personal preference and style. By all means, you can totally skip this part. Now is also a good time to play around with technique and figure out what looks good to you. Alright, and now I'm going to make some adjustments on the bow, grabbing the bright coral color and painting that in for added highlights so that it doesn't blend in too much with the back of the door and stands out as its own piece. Now I'm going to combine the bow with the rest of the wreath. And then I'm going to combine the wreath with the door. Now I have it all on one layer. I'm going to duplicate it, and I am going to move it into my little nifty group that keeps it all safe from mistakes. Remaining on layer 2, now that it's all combined onto the one layer, I'm just going in and adding a couple of touch-ups here and there, just smudging and making it look like it was all painted together at the same time. And I add a new layer on top. I put the blending mode add on. I'm choosing the coral color, and I'm going to use this as a really bright highlight to just really push the lighting a little bit on this piece. Remaining on that same layer, I'm going to select a really bright cream color, and I'm going to use that to start drawing on extra highlights on top of the ornaments. Now that that's done, I'm going to add a new layer, also put that on the add blending mode. I'm going to stay on the cream color, and I'm going to draw in these little circles, which I would like to have them act as lights, you know, Christmas lights. All right, and so now we can duplicate that layer, and on that layer I'm going to select the smudge tool, make sure I'm on turpentine, and I'm going to create a glowing effect by smudging the colors around. Here I realized that I needed to add one more, so you'll see me working on that right here. Okay, and now I can combine those layers, and there are my lights. Now I'm going to find, takes me a moment, but I do end up finding it, this green. I'm going to use this green as a highlight. I try to keep in mind where the porch light is and try to be very discerning of where I have this very vibrant green show up. I think lighting is most impactful when it has very specific places and doesn't apply to all areas. I think it just has a little bit more pop, a little bit more power in what it conveys. Next, I duplicate the door and I end up combining that because I can tell that some of it was a little opaque, so I just make sure there is no more opaqueness before I start drawing on it again. And I go diagonally with the selection tool across the top left corner of the door, and I increase the brightness as well as the saturation. And then I select the bottom right of the wreath and feather, and then I make it a little bit darker, a little less saturated, just so we really get to get a sense of the highlights and shadows on this door. I also select the ribbon and do the same thing to it that I did with the door and the other part of the wreath. I feather a little bit, go into adjustments, I take the brightness into the shadowed area and take the saturation down a bit so that we get just a little bit more color variation and really help convey where the light is and where the shadow is on the piece. I'm back on the layer with the blending mode add, and I am creating more highlights on the bow or the ribbon. I really just want it to stand out a bit more against that red door. Now I'm combining both layer 10 and 11, which are the blending modes that have add on. So I know that if I combine them, nothing about them changes. I play around. You don't have to do this step, but I wanted to give it a try where I add a little bit of blue, some just cooler colors into parts of the ribbon to just give it a little bit more depth and shadow. I also try out this teal color and just add in a couple brush strokes here and there. This is not a necessary step. It was more just playing around and seeing how it looked. And we're all done. This is the final product. I hope that you had a wonderful time sitting and painting this piece with me. I certainly enjoyed it. Thank you so much to those of you who requested this as a tutorial. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. And I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Take care, guys. Bye.